fair while ago now, we got the first news that at some point in the future we'd be getting a fresh Avatar series, not based around The Legend of Korra or The Last Airbender. Set to celebrate 20 years of the Avatar franchise, Avatar 7 Havens is going to consist of 2 seasons combining for 26 episodes. The show is set to follow the next Avatar after Korra in a post-apocalyptic style world in which the Avatar is being blamed for the state of things and is being hunted by enemies both human and spirit, whilst what remains of humanity must linger within the aforementioned 7 Havens. From what I understand, it feels like it's going to be an infusion of Mad Max within the Avatar world, with the only character she can trust at the beginning being her brother. I would expect that the cataclysmic event that shaped this new world is going to be the result of a final battle between Korra and insert random spirit/evil person here. Now that I think about it, having a villain kill an Avatar and then have to contend with their successor, that's actually quite fun and different. Usually each Avatar has their own set of villains, don't they? But this gives a chance for something actually different, something fresh. Regardless of the premise though, for me, at this point I'd take whatever I can get. I've always been a massive fan of the franchise in general, right back to when the first series was airing on TV for its first ever run. I loved it then, and I enjoyed watching The Legend of Korra too. I even dipped my toes into the graphic novels and the comics and whatnot, but I just couldn't stick with them. They didn't feel the same, to tell you the truth. So when Avatar Studios was announced, I was all in. New movie starring the gang that will bridge the gap between the two shows? Count me in! Then the idea of a fresh show at long last? A show I never thought was actually going to happen? I'm very excited about that. Of course, with this came a fair bit of discontent too, and most of it surrounding the role of Korra within the new story, i.e. being viewed as the Avatar that ruined everything. The one that destroyed society as we know it and regressed all the progress made over the course of numerous Avatars and hundreds to thousands of years. I suppose if you're a big die-hard fan of Korra, it would be a very bitter pill to swallow in that regard. So that's really what I want to talk about today. Is it right that this is going to be the new status quo? Is it damaging to The Legend of Korra? Is it killing its rewatchability? Because that seems to be a big part of the discourse I'm seeing online, that it retroactively wrecks Korra, especially since her world was left in a far more hopeful place at the end of her own show. I'm not really going to focus too hard on the continuation in the comics or anything of the sort because I'd be the first to admit, I've never dived into the supplementary comics for Korra. I did for The Last Airbender to a point, but then I even had to stop keeping up with it all. I just didn't like it. Sometimes I go on a wiki binge to get my information that way, but otherwise I'm just a show casual with no regrets. So yes, the ending of the series was very hopeful. Hopeful for a new world that both human and spirit can share together, with a wiser, more mature Korra to safeguard that peace. Therefore, I can see what people mean when they say that they think the new series could amplify the already significant hate that Korra gets. After all, it is nothing new. Korra's copped hate for over a decade at this point. Right from the very beginning when she was announced, people have had things to say about the character. For starters, she isn't Aang. I suppose for a lot of people, if they intended to do a follow-up show for The Last Airbender, it would be one that picked up on the loose plot threads that were present in the original show. One only has to have a cursory glance at what some of the comics have done and see what people expected to see from the show originally. Stuff like, how does the Avatar navigate a newfound peace among the kingdoms after 100 years of war? How do you reconcile the fire colonies and the mixing of the kingdoms in that time? Do you try to reset everything to how it was before? Or do you work with what you've got? Then there's that massive loose thread of Zuko and Azula's mother. Where did she go? What happened to her really? How would things be playing out in the Fire Nation? A short while ago, they were all in on the war machine. They weren't far off from conquering the entire world. The Earth Kingdom was all but finished. Only the Water Tribes would remain to oppose them, with the North barely having survived their first siege, and only doing so because of Aang. To go from that to pulling back, making peace and reparations, and having the old world order abruptly overthrown, well, it's a big cause for drama, isn't it? So when you look at it on the surface, way back when Avatar The Last Airbender first finished its run, these are the questions you would have had. These are the questions people wanted answered in a new show. There's a sense of familiarity with the original set of characters and a desire to see what they're going to do next, to see them evolve and grow and not move on to something fresh and unfamiliar. I do think this is somewhat of an excuse that people hide behind though. Even if we had gotten more serious about Aang, the moment the story moved on to a fresh Avatar, I think the people would always have kicked off. This way, they just had actual ammunition to complain about because they wanted more of their OG, more of the classic, more of their Avatar, and not a newbie. Another thing I've always suspected is that people were very salty that Korra, and thus the Avatar this time, was a woman. A strong female side character, that's fine by me, but a strong female lead who's the most powerful character in the story bar none? No thank you! I have no real hard solid evidence to back up my assumptions here, it's just having read through some of the complaints of the era, and even in hindsight, it does feel like a pushback from that specific concept. However, then the show started, and people would just go all in on the character and the concept no matter what happened. After all, when we first saw Aang, he was a master of airbending. But the reality is that he was a massive rookie in other aspects of his bending. Meanwhile, when you meet Korra, while she has no airbending skills, she's already mastered the remaining elements off screen, not just her birth element. Already this meant that she was going to be presented as a stronger character right from the get-go. On top of that, Aang was a far more passive and goofy sort of character, whilst Korra, especially Season 1 Korra, can be a bit of a bulldozer. She's loud and aggressive and forceful in her opinions. She's reckless and often rushes in without thinking of a plan. Whilst Aang was rather humble a lot of the time and very unsure about his role as the Avatar, it didn't always feel that way for Korra. Absolutely fine characterization if you ask me, but the show did cop a lot of flack at the time and in retrospective discussion. People hold it as a black mark against this character. Somehow, I think if she was a dude, these personality traits wouldn't have mattered. Then you come to questions about her competence as the Avatar. This idea that she kind of sucks and always makes the wrong choices that just make things worse. The idea that she's somewhat of a loser. People always enjoyed nitpicking in that regard. First off, you have the whole Aman storyline with the Equalists, where she represents everything they despise about benders. In the course of that confrontation with Aman, she does get bamboozled at almost every turn, and then has her fire, water, and earthbending taken away, before she develops the ability to airbend at long last and finally takes him out, forcing him to use bending in front of his followers and destroying his mystique. But since she got taken to the limit against this guy, she gets viewed as weak. Let's ignore how Aang was getting rinsed by Ozai until his back got poked into a rock, and he could activate the Avatar state for the easy win. Then in Season 2, she trusts her uncle, and what do you know, it all goes pear-shaped and she loses access to her past lives, including Aang, which really got people in their feelings, didn't it? People for sure hated that so much, and even now it crops up as one of the most hated parts of Korra's run. They act like it's definitive proof that she is the lesser Avatar overall. Then there's that whole thing with the Red Lotus and her almost getting permanently killed in the Avatar state, which leaves her with PTSD. Aang getting killed by lightning from Azula whilst in the Avatar state though? No, that couldn't be helped. It made his character feel more vulnerable. It upped the stakes, didn't it? She retreats for a couple of years to recover from her ordeal, and in the meantime, Kuvira starts to piece the Earth Kingdom together back slowly, region by region, before declaring a new Earth Empire with herself in charge, as well as demanding Zaofu and the United Republic of Nations be merged into the Empire once and for all, reversing what she saw as a usurpation of Earth Kingdom land. Because Korra wasn't there to be the one to spearhead the peace movement in the Earth Kingdom, well, this means it must be all her fault for Kuvira rising to power in the first place. But Aang getting trapped in the ice? Oh, that's just unfortunate happenstance, isn't it? So you can see, in a lot of ways, the poor decisions that Korra makes, or the negative consequences / her failings, are looked at in the harshest light possible, whilst it wasn't viewed in the same lens at all for Aang. Oh, and there's also the fact that Korra ends up in a same-sex relationship whilst Aang's in a heterosexual relationship. I remember backlash about how it felt rushed and out of nowhere, and years on, I do think that similar dynamics have been done a lot better in other shows. But at the same time, I do feel like in the end, a lot of people use this to amplify their disdain as a sort of gotcha. See, her relationship wasn't well written in the lead-up, therefore her character must be trash, blah 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 blah. I mean, look at this 3 whole seasons of Aang Katara build-up, it's not on the same level, blah 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 blah. I think it's pretty clear that Korra's always had a very large contingent of haters that compare her negatively to Aang at every turn. Mostly for reasons that are rather stupid, to tell you the truth. The characters are completely different people who live through completely different events, and thus, it shouldn't matter. That being said, I do find the new dynamic here very funny, because now it's the Korra stans who are shitting on the concept of a new show because they think it's going to make Korra seem incompetent, wiping out the good place her story was left off at, and somewhat justifies the hate her character gets. And I get it. Nobody likes their favourite characters getting the short end of the stick, especially when it's a character that you feel like has gotten that short end of the stick again and again and again and over and over and over. However, surely at this stage, it's rather clear this is getting a bit overblown, isn't it? For starters, I think it's very obvious that Korra is not actually going to be the person that did anything wrong. She's not going to be presented that way. True to her character, I expect she's going to go down swinging, and that the destruction will be after she's died or from the same battle that kills her. It's not Roku's fault that he copped volcano gas to the face and collapsed, allowing Sozin to let him die and then go full conquer on the world. It's just not. And it's not Aang's fault that he fell into the sea and he couldn't help the world sooner. It's not his fault he got blasted by Azula, which led to the fall of Ba Sing Se and the Earth Kingdom in general. Thus, it shouldn't matter for this either. Especially since I'm fully expecting there's going to be a very sympathetic flashback to showcase that this wasn't her fault. That the tragedy comes from the world not knowing the truth, and thus her legacy is briefly tarnished until the new Avatar shows them all what's up. You don't look back at the Equalists and think, oh, Aang should have fostered more happiness in this new city-state he co-founded, shouldn't he? It doesn't retroactively make his story in The Last Airbender suck. Neither does the criticism of his parenting from 2 of his children suddenly make his dynamic with Katara suck or ruin his characterization in his own show either. For me, it's the same thing for Korra. Haters are always going to hate, but you can't let that stand in the way of a good and compelling story for the characters that will come afterwards. On top of that, I think when you take a step back, this is one of the few options available given how technology is advancing in the show's lore. Either Korra would have to die prematurely, which would piss everybody off immensely, or the world would have to be completely different and far more modernized. And I just don't think people would be interested in that kind of story, and so the apocalypse was the only way. I don't know. Maybe you just think I'm coping with this video and I'm completely wrong, but I do think that whilst Korra's always been a hate magnet, this new show's not going to make anything any worse than it ever was before. And in fact, through talking to the past life and getting flashbacks to the truth, it may actually turn people around on the character. We've not seen Mentor Korra before. It could be really interesting. Regardless, with all that being said, these have just been my opinions, and now I'd like to hear yours. What do you think of the new show concept? Do you think it's going to wreck Korra's character and make her a lightning rod for hate, or maybe you're more on my side here? I'm curious for your thoughts, so make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and let me know.